Hello. Thank you so much for joining us at our coffee chat for the spring season. My name is Aida Esmeralda, and I am HFR's poetry editor this year. And I am so happy to be here in conversation with these awesome, brilliant writers. To get started, we would like to offer a land acknowledgement. So again, thank you so much for joining us for our spring coffee chat featuring 3 contributors from our recent issue 71, which came out earlier this year. Today with us, we have Preeti Parikh, Ghaus, and Sadia Hassan. All 3 of these writers are multi-genre writers who work in both poetry and nonfiction. We're excited that they've joined us tonight. Before we get started, we wanted to acknowledge the 22 Native nations that have inhabited this land for centuries. Arizona State University's 4 campuses are located in the Salt River Valley on the ancestral territories of Indigenous peoples, including the Akimel O'odham, Pima, and Peepash Maricopa Indian communities, whose care and keeping of these lands allow us to be here today. We know that a land acknowledgement without action is not sufficient, and thus are making efforts toward equitable practices, most immediately by waiving the submission fee for all Indigenous writers who would like to submit creative work to HFR. In addition, we just announced our inaugural Indigenous Poets Prize in collaboration with the Center for the Imagination in the Borderlands, Red Ink Journal, the Thousand Languages Project, and the Piper Center for Creative Writing. The final judge for the contest is Pulitzer Prize-winning poet and director of the Center for the Imagination in the Borderlands, Natalie Diaz, which is very exciting. Winning poems will receive a cash prize, publication in HFR, and will be featured in a virtual reading with Natalie. So if you are here in attendance and if you identify as Indigenous, we completely happily encourage you to go to our website for more details and to submit. Just some housekeeping kind of information. Please use the chat in the Zoom room as a space to celebrate anything you hear that really moves you. Feel free to share those lines, to reflect on the conversation. We do ask that if you'd like to ask a question for the discussion later in the evening, to please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the event, our senior editor, Susan, will be sharing links to the author's work and more. Now I'll go ahead and read our author bios and go ahead and welcome them onto our Zoom stage. So to start, Preeti Parikh is an Indian American poet and essayist with a past educational background in medicine and a recent MFA from the Rainier Writing Workshop. She is at work on a poetry collection. A 2023 Kundiman Fellow, Preeti is the recipient of support from Millay Arts, Bread Loaf Writers Conference, AWP Writer-to-Writer Program, and Tin House Winter Workshop. Born and raised in India, she now lives with her family in a multi-generational household in Ohio. So welcome, Preeti. Samander, or S.J. Ghaus, is a Pakistani-American writer, educator, illustrator, and cultural worker for the people, drawing on years of community organizing in national and local movements for justice. They work across genre to dream into decolonial possibilities. They are a Tin House alum and resident, VONA Voices of Our Nations Fellow, and recipient of the 2020 Vera Meyer Strube Academy of American Poets Prize. You can find their work at poets.org, Poetry Daily, Hayden's Ferry, and elsewhere. They hold an MFA from Indiana University. And welcome, Samander. And finally, Sadia Hassan is a Somali writer from Atlanta, Georgia. She's the author of Enumeration from Akashic Press, selected by Kwame Dawes and Chris Abani as part of the 2020 New Generations African Poets Chapbook set. More of her work can be found in the Boston Review, Long Reads, and the American Academy of Poetry. So please join me in welcoming these wonderful writers to our Zoom stage. And writers, feel free and turn on your cameras and join us now. Yay. I'm so excited for you all to be here. Like I mentioned, I was a huge fan coming across your work when it was in the queue, and then when we had selected it, it was just wonderful to see the way that you're all writing. Um, I'd love to kind of begin our conversation by asking you all to briefly discuss what your work in our issue is about, formally and thematically. And feel free to screen share if you'd like us to see. I know you all are kind of working in the visual realm as well. And maybe after you kind of say some words about your work, we'd love to hear maybe some of your favorite lines from those individual pieces and why.
I'm happy to start us off. Um, so I have a prose piece in this latest issue. It's a lyric essay. It feels pretty straight up prose to me, though I am also a poet, and that is usually like my primary medium. So it's a little bit of a venture beyond what I know. Uh, and this essay is maybe a little corny, but I think it's really about learning how to love and how to approach love, like capital L, unconditional love, when that's something you've been denied from your earliest relationships. And so in this essay, I'm still learning, but I am learning in this essay how to do that through like queer friendship, through music in particular, like Hindustani classical music that I'm learning currently and in the essay from a Kawal in Pakistan, which is where my family's from. So it's something, it's kind of working into this space of disbelief almost, that this possibility of return, the possibility of approaching or being approached by love isn't something I think I ever believed was possible as a queer person with a lot of distance from their family. So yeah, so it's kind of about how belonging and return work as a queer person, how unconditional love is something that is still approachable for us too. And I guess a couple favorite lines. There is, I think maybe my favorite sentence in the work. It's 3 sentences, but they're short. It's a point where I say, "But my friends are fearless, despite the certainty of their separation. They stretch their fingers towards sound. They collapse in the reaching in joy." And I love that sentence because I love my friends. And and I love, I love the bravery, the courage. Like I love that this is part of what it means to be building chosen family, to be returning, to belong somewhere, is to get to be brave and learn from the bravery of the people you love.
Oh my gosh, yes. Love all the love for the friends, the joy. Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. I don't know, Sadia or Preeti, does maybe something Samander said.
Yes,
Colleague.
literally. Thank you, Ida. Every time somebody speaks, I'm like, let's make a cento. I never know how to say that word, but let's learning from the bravery of the people you love feels like a lifelong lesson, and it feels like such a sacred and beautiful thing to be able to do. So yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna share my screen, and this is a judgment-free zone because my screen is a mess. But here is my poem. Desktop. Can you guys see my screen? Yay, okay. So yeah, my poem began as so many different things. It began initially as an Instagram post, actually. And this is a window. This is my friend Antonio's window in, I think it's in the Sunset neighborhood in San Francisco. In 2015, when I first moved to San Francisco. And what began as an Instagram post, often so many of my essays and my poems began as missives to other people, or to the girl I was, or something I'm trying to get back to. And so I didn't feel like I could write it all down, and all of it didn't seem like it needed to be seen. And so then the idea of like layering it helped quell, the compulsion of like saying it and putting it out there. But then I was like, you can also cover it right back up. And so the two poems on top of each other, the one beneath, the reader can't read all the way. But on my end, I can always remove the first part and read what's underneath and put it back. And so what I loved about this experience was that like it didn't need to make sense. And it was created over a period of like 5 years. And so it didn't even need to make it connect. It didn't even need to like connect sometimes. Like the reason I did one thing might not need to connect to the reason I did something else. And I'm really thankful that Hayden's Fairy Review took it, because you guys published such really great experimental work. It was like, really happy to have it here. So it's about a lot of things. And every year, the thing that it's about kind of changes. But two of my favorite lines in here are, I'm seeing the words and can't read. She wishes she had the back to bear it, forgiveness. And then what is the utility of being broken? And those two lines kind of remind me that like, it's an embodied experience, right? Like compassion, forgiveness, gentleness, all of those are like lived in the body. And like, sometimes it's too much to like literally bear. And so, yeah, and I think questions help me get to the other side of understanding, like, if something has ruptured, like, does it still have use, and to whom and why? Yeah. Thank you all so much. That's all I'll share for now.
Thank you so much. No, it was wonderful to get to see it again on the screen, and for everyone in the chat to be able to kind of also be able to look at it. And yes, we love all the experimental work, all the weird, send it. Yes, we love it. We're happy to support it and uplift it. But thank you so much for sharing all that. I'm really resonating with what you're all are saying about love, compulsion, kind of what's happening in the body. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, I loved what you said, Sadia, about poems as, thinking of poems as missives to loved ones, but also to past selves. And I really responded to that, and also to the sense of saying what needs to be said, but also having the freedom of sharing parts of it and having it layered and visible to you, but portions of it visible to the reader. I really liked that. I am also going to screen share, so let me take care of that. So I think you should be able to see my screen up there. So I have two poems in this issue 71 of HFR, the off skin and off the body, your catches you. As you can tell by the title, both of these poems are thematically concerned with the body and its demarcations, the skin and the integument. I have a background in medicine, and I trained as a radiologist. So, analyzing what lies underneath the skin and within the human body has, always been meaningful to me. And the skin as an interface holds a lot of meaning. Ironically, I have also lived with a sense of unease in my body for many years, often finding my mind alienated from its full embodied inhabitants. And this sense of unease, this vacillation between the idea of having a body, but versus the feeling of being the body, is an undercurrent that flows through these pieces. And formally, I'd say both of these pieces use the paragraph as a unit. If I come to my piece of the body, your catches you. I've had readers describe this poem as a haiban, which is a travelogue prose poem followed by a haiku. This poem is uttered in the second person, addressing the child protagonist. It is a recollection of a family visit and a testimony to some unnerving events that occurred. And I close the prose poem with these fragments reverberating in the aftermath of what's been said earlier. Going back to the first poem, the off-skin is an associative meditation that spirals around the concept of skin and assembles fragments of image, thought, memories, quotes, and even dictionary entries that all oscillate around the locus of human skin. I'll read a few lines from this piece, and you can see them on the screen here. Deh, twacha, khal, chamdi, charm. Words for hide, words for skin, words as skin. Burns, stretch marks, keratosis, inoculations, a transcript, a translation. Stitches, staples, glue, tapes, ways to sew the wound, sew the skin. And the reason why I maybe picked these is that, as you can see, the text here is apertured with lacunae, with typographical markings, such as the brackets here, the Purna Viram, and also with Hindi words in Devanagari script. And my hope with my writing with these modes of assertion and quietude is for them to enact a texture and a syntax of, I guess, multivalence, rupture, silence, and also echoing. So yeah, that was my piece. I'll stop my screen share now.
Thank you so much. I love what you said about the syntax of echoing, of rupture. So much to like imagine there. And I'm really kind of feeling and thinking about, like physically feeling everything that you are all saying about the relationship with the language and the body in your works. And you kind of briefly mentioned it, Preeti, but since your pieces are all kind of working in the fragment, in a kind of fragmenting, I'd love for maybe us to talk about like what writing in fragment feels like, you know, it allows for you to do, either with tempo, sound, or the emotional breadth of the work. You know, do you consider yourself writers that pay attention to like the unit of sound or words or entire lines? And how does that kind of influence the way you're fragmenting?
I guess I can take that first. So I think that fragmentation and assemblage has played a big role in my current writing, both as like a concept using these registers of multivalence and translingualism, but also with a sense of brokenness and containing that brokenness seeking containment. It is also factored into the large scale project of my poems, but also on the poem level, the line level, the word level, sort of enactment of this sense I have of multiplicity and disruption. And I am really intrigued by the idea of poetry being emotional in nature and theatrical in operation. I think it was Larkin who said that. And this idea that we can dramatize or create a transcription of a life through syntax, through diction, and through the way we arrange text and white space on the page. This idea really interests me. And so if there is like a migrant consciousness or speaker in my poem who is often displaced, who often undergoes a shift in perspective and sometimes feels wounded and rankles with dissociation and feels an urgency of containment, then I feel that perhaps a fragmented form of writing can be a gesture towards this way of seeing, feeling, and being in the world. And fragmentation can enact the brittle nature of things. It can enact silence, and also I like to think like the wound of the unsayable. And it can also, act as a propulsive energy that is sort of gathering all these multiple vantage points, multiple voices, and also something that's very important to me is multilingual tongues. So I feel that that's what fragmentation does for me.
Preeti, I'm going to be echoing the wound of the unsayable for a really long time. So much of what you say is resonant to me because the speaker who's displaced and who feels like fragmentation is the only thing that can kind of contain. Oh Lord, look at my baby. Baby, you will die. That fragmentation is the only thing that can contain that brokenness. Like people think that like wholeness is actually the thing that's important, but it's really about like what that brokenness kind of being grounds for some kind of reconstitution, some kind of rebuilding. And that's what I'm much more interested in, not the never shattering, but like what space can we create for like a more tender reconstitution, like so that it doesn't hurt to put everything back together again. And I appreciate that your poetry kinds of gives us that space to read into the breaks a little bit. Yeah, I think for me, what fragmentation it does for me is it allows me, it gives me a break from trying to you talk about a transcript, right? I'm much more interested in like in the that sound that's kind of off to the side, and you're like, what was that? Like, how can I bring that back into the center of the poem? And there was something you said that made me frantically write something down. Yeah, like what is the sentence like? Not what the sentence is in acting, right? But fragmentation for me is like the sentence as like a deviant act, like trying to pull in all the multiple stoppages and breaking points and try to kind of constitute them into and represent it to the audience as like, this is something that is new and makes sense and like has validity all on its own. And I think about that because like when the first book of poems, I don't know if it was a book of poems, but like Aimé Césaire's A Notebook of Return, like made me feel like, oh my God, okay, like all of it can eventually like build a new world, right? And I think he referred to it as like a beneficial madness, right? That like we're so afraid of words that kind of turn us around and make us lose our way, that we try to write, sometimes narratively or linearly in a way to kind of convince ourselves that like there's a beginning and a middle and an end, and that's important to the narrative. But like what I find is that fragmentation opens up windows for me that I can kind of jump out of, or that the speaker can kind of find a break for themselves, or catch a glimpse of themselves in a different future or a different lifetime. And so it's a kind of time travel for me, and I really appreciate it. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
That was so beautiful, both of you. I'm sitting here like, yes, everything you say. Yeah, the thing you were saying, Sadia, about the sentence and like breaking free in some ways of language, right? Like that fragmentation helps break us out of the box of like chronological time. It's like an unsentencing, like when we fragment a sentence or a word or a line or a full like body of prose, we get to unsentence ourselves from like the grammar of the English language, which is very, Hortense Spillers came up with that, not me. And that's, we get free through language, like we get to get free through writing. And that's how like the act of making poems, the act of making an essay can be something that like teaches us how to break towards beauty. Because the world is always breaking, right? Like we know that the world breaks often. The world often breaks towards suffering, but it does often break towards beauty. And I think also as writers and as artists, we get to guide the world towards that too. Like we get to guide language, which is, I mean, our world, right? Towards breaking towards beauty, instead of always towards despair or towards suffering. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what fragmentation does for me also, is for me, it helps me evade capture, right? Helps me evade like the sentence, or the sentencing of English, to kind of call back to you, Preeti, too, and your emphasis too on like multilingualism. Yeah, and it's really an act of freedom. I think too, with this particular essay, I was thinking a lot about trauma, and how to write trauma in a way that cares for ourselves as writers, but also for the reader. And years ago, I was in this beautiful workshop with Samia Bashir, who I love her. Yes. One of the best teachers I think I've ever had. And she had us do this long writing exercise where we had to breathe, like inhale, exhale, and write, and do that 30 times. And it took like an hour. So we were all spread out, like outside, just breathing and writing for an hour. And I wanted to write this essay that is about some really hard stuff. I wanted to write it in a way that doesn't punch anybody, right? That we can fragment in ways so that people breathe, so that we can kind of work in increments with trauma, so that as readers and as writers, like, we can let our bodies be safe in it, so that we can actually like process the language, process what's being said, like hold the emotions in our palms and not be afraid to like turn them around and poke at them and understand them. And that too is fragmentation. It's not always like the chasm of unknowing. It's also like, the chasm that we know inside ourselves, like our lungs, where we breathe, our bodies. So I like to think too, the fragmentation in this essay is a way of coaxing something tender out of us too.
Simon, add one more thing. And Ida, there's something that you said earlier, like, oh, do you guys pay attention to the unit of, I think you said unit of sound or unit of music. And Samantha, what you were just saying, thinking about fugitivity and breaking towards beauty, made me think of Fred Moten's In the Break, right? Of like how jazz, how Black musicians and artists and creatives have always transmuted the suffering of this world into something beautiful, but like controlled by our breath, right? And that desire to keep breathing. But yes, that's.
Y'all, I'm like, let me sign up for the classes y'all are teaching, because I'm learning so much from all of you. I'm like writing notes, but I'm like, okay, I'm moderating too. I need to like be in that role. But thank you so much for everything that you're saying. I mean, specifically about like time travel capture, like I think there's so much there that we're seeing in your work. Like it's just writing against this commodification, right, that we see typically happening with like strictly adhering to genre, and to a linearity that is actually really difficult and sometimes even impossible to write, as like a colonized person. So yeah, thank you so much for your ideas. Kind of maybe piggybacking off of that idea of time travel or just time in general, like given that your pieces, like there's some kind of oscillation between the present and the past, and we're jumping through different moments of memory, even space, and even sometimes just voice. I'm interested to hear like what each of your relationships are to those turns, to that turning that's happening. Like what is the decision making involved when you're maybe writing the turn and also even revising the turn? Like how do you change gears to follow that different line of thought or desire as it's kind of beginning to happen on the page?
I feel like I think I actually think Preeti kind of talked about this in our last question as well. But the condition, I think, of like being a diasporic person is like the condition of fragmentation, right? Is the condition of turning always, of being in process, you know, more than we are stable. I think even for me, like while writing this essay, I was quite literally jumping through time and space. Like I started that essay or wrote the first draft of it in Karachi, like, you know, in my friend Sadia's apartment, like pretty close to a lot of the events that were happening in it. And then like finished it in the US, and I was like crossing an ocean while writing. And I feel like that's illustrative, you know, of what it means to like to write as a diasporic person, or to write into a diasporic poetics, where like physically or geographically I can be in one place, but like spiritually I'm somewhere else, you know, and that's kind of my being all the time, you know. Yeah, like I'm thinking about, you know, I'm the other day I was playing a harmonium that I brought back from Pakistan in my partner's house in Bloomington, you know, singing a song that was written like 50 years ago in my parents' language. Like this is all time travel. So it makes sense that if that's the life that I live, that would also be the condition of my writing too.
We're so polite. The condition of my writing. I really, the turn is so I find that the turn is so arbitrary in poetry. It's like, oh, when enough momentum builds up, then you have permission to turn away or break the fourth wall. And just to return to our conversation about breath, it feels more like a gasping, where like it's more so that the camera honestly just keeps turning. And that has helped me to think about it just cinematography wise, of like who's in the room and where is the camera landing at this moment. And that itself will kind of train the eye of the reader to follow and pan along, because the turn is actually, yeah, it's that it keeps turning, is that it keeps the poem, or the speaker at least, keeps wanting to turn away from what they can't bear to look at for too long or too directly, right? And so revision is really difficult for me, because it feels like what I'm cutting away at is embodied and like full of sight, and it feels difficult sometimes. But when I think about it more as like a bouquet, then I'm like, okay, you can have many different bouquets, right? And so like I try to let my writing live in many different stages, and all of them feel complete to me. It's just that they have a different sort of like reverence and a different sort of resonance even. And I have to respect that. Like one valence, an image might be really at the center of one valence of writing, and another image might have that same kind of centeredness in another version of that same piece. And I've learned that to let them live alongside each other as much as I try to live along all of myself. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, so I really relate to what you mentioned about revision being like the bulk of the work involved in writing like this, because I too feel that my piece is kind of writing an associative flow of thought, and so there is, I found myself like obsessing over a central idea, a central concept, and just allowing myself initially in the stage of drafting is to just create a list of images, memories, and bring in outside sources, quotes, and things of that nature. And I think once I had that down is when the work of actually, assembling and ordering it is when it took place. And in that process, like you said, a bouquet there can be many bouquets created from the same flowers or something along those lines. And I felt in a similar way that out of the many permutations and combinations of how these different associative elements are put together, there can be many combinations, and I was always looking out for the surprising resonances, the sparks that can be generated as a result of maybe putting a fragment where there is narrative time and there's action happening, whether it's anecdote or if it's a memory from childhood or from a past self. But what happens when I place it next to a fragment where there's not really much happening time-wise, like time is suspended, but there's focus on a certain image, or there's focus on language itself. And so for me, it was really meaningful to see how these different placements came together, and to also zoom out and see what kind of a mosaic or a collage is being created through these different elements, but also at each step being mindful of maintaining I like to think of textures a lot. So I always wanted to maintain like the grittiness of these individual elements, but I also was interested in what it looked like visually as a mosaic or a collage.
I just love what you just said, Preeti, about placing things next to each other and seeing what happens, and that you can rearrange that and see what kind of other dynamics are unleashed from that. That is so beautiful, and so much about like the just like the fire and the energy in relation, like when so much of writing is about putting things in relation to each other. Metaphor is all about putting things in relation to each other, and that's where the energy is in that like kinship, or like in the relationship, which is so beautiful. So thank you so much for saying that.
Yes. Wow. Thank you all so much. Yes, I'm just like absorbing everything. um, and maybe to even have us dive a little deeper, maybe to some more kind of specific ideas. Like I couldn't help but notice that the presence of like mothers in the works that we have in the issue, and I guess like I'm wondering, there's a beckoning back to and even from these maternal figures in the writing that that we have an issue from you all. And I was wondering, could you all describe the presence of that familial? Like, how does it manifest in your practice? What do you hope or wish to happen or transform when you beckon those familial figures into the writing?
Yeah, I think it's it's fascinating that the mother figure appears in all of the writing that we are sharing today. And for myself, I'd say that women's stories engage me a lot. I'm interested in them, and I'm interested also in the question of the work done by women. So whether it's the work of art, it's the work of science, or if it's the work of parenthood, or even the work of family, the work of domesticity, I'm interested in all of that. And in my work, I feel like the maternal. Sorry, my alarm is turned that off. And so yeah, I was saying that in my work, I think the maternal manifests as a lineage, as like a double perspective of being a daughter, but also being a mother who has a daughter. And so what ends up happening in the act of writing is that I have these multiple perspectives or personae that are all wading into a common pool of experience and memories, and exploring is this idea of multiple selves, like having the various positions I occupy in the collectives. And I'm interested in that for myself, but also for the mother in my life. And this idea of identity and the way we perform identity in various roles has also been is a locus of tenderness and wounding for me. And so I feel that when I beckon these ways, grappling at the origin stories of my selves, or at the wound that I feel that I have felt in the performance of these roles. So yeah, I guess that was my take on this.
Okay. I'll jump in. It feels like a tricky question for me. I don't know what I'm beckoning towards, when I'm writing about the familial, or when I'm writing about my mother. I think I'm writing into grief, right? And grief is transformative, and I don't know what's coming. And so the process of writing the familial, or writing the mother, right, or at least the biological mother, is a process of undoing, is a process of breaking, and towards something that I don't know. And so much of this is actually about surrendering to the unknowing, rather than trying to work towards an idea. And that yeah, I mean that's terrifying, right? And so I think for me, the when we talk about the process, like what it's like to bring the familial into the writing practice, like the practice of writing, I think is one of grieving, which is not a bad thing necessarily, but is definitely something that is necessary. And so along with that, the practice of writing this, the practice of doing this kind of beckoning of grief, which is entwined with family for me, is one that requires a lot of care, requires that I write or learn to write in ways that don't cause somatic distress, right? I used to write these long essays and and just get migraines the next day, and I don't do that anymore, And that too, like that is the writing practice also, is learning to take care of our bodies and ourselves. But yeah, I mean, this is not maybe the most or the strongest thread in the essay that I wrote for y'all, but I am, moving towards the idea of chosen family, and also so simultaneously beckoning towards the family of origin, which is like, complicated and difficult, but also beckoning in chosen family, and which is also complicated, right? Like chosen family is not all red, like beautiful, no questions, nothing is wrong ever. Like there is conflict, there is question, there are hard things, but it's different, right? And the love is something that one can feel as unconditional or as approachable. And so I think, in this piece, and I think in most of what I write about my family, I'm writing towards this acknowledgement also that queer people mother each other, and also that queer people are mothered by the land. And in this particular essay, it's the sound of the land, which is the qawwali, which is the sargam, is this like classical music. It feels weird to call it that, but the Hindustani musical tradition is one that is of the land. And so that sort of becomes the source, or the embodiment of an unconditional love, which is what I think we often associate with our mothers. Right?
I love both of your reflections. Thank y'all. I'm thinking about land and the physical, actual mothers we have. Yeah, the mother figures a lot in my writing, and I just had to come to terms with it, right? There was a part of me that felt a deep shame. I was like, you can't keep writing about someone who can't write back, right? Who doesn't wield the same power with regards to like the language that has the most currency. And like, I think about what my mother would write about me if she, chose to write in the way that I write. But I also think about the mother as a mythos, right? That the mother is a myth. That a mother is just a woman who had a child at some point or chose to have a child, and that has helped me think about the thing that I'm beckoning towards is forgiveness for myself and for my mother and all of the mothers that I know and love. Like I want that for us, self-forgiveness, especially because as women, we're not allowed to make mistakes, or love poorly, or fail at love, or fail at caring for others. And I don't think it's fair because we're human. And to be human is to fail, right? And so I find myself trying to get back to the beginning of my mother's story, my mother's story, the story of Eve, even trying to go back and back and back. And I think it's just how I write, in that kind of circular search for a beginning, so that I can like tell a future story that's more gentle, that's more healed, that has more language. Because as you know, I came to this country with my mother and with my sisters as we were refugees, right? And what happened is a gulf there was a gulf between us and our mother, and the gulf was the English language, and the gulf was the American teenage experience, and the gulf was you name it. And trying to reach back over that gulf became exhausting, and so we stopped trying, right? And so how do we relanguage what became unlanguageable? How do we retool what we have to make something that kind of jiggers at that kind of loneliness and that gulf? And what I found was mythology, right? A lot of my poems are about the relationship between Persephone and Demeter, and thinking about do we have a Black mythos for refugee mothers that allows them to fail at loving, and their mother and their daughter forgives them, right? And how can we, and if we don't, how can we create that? And so, yeah, I just want a different story.
You guys are like, I'm feeling it all. Thank you so much. I mean, your answers are so just thoughtful and careful, and just thank you so much. I'm really, really in gratitude for the energy that you're bringing to the space. And I am holding all our mothers, both physical, chosen, land mothers, spiritual mothers, with us right now, and thank you for that. I guess just before I ask another question, I also want to remind the participants, the audience, that if you do have questions, to please put them in the Q&A, and we'll have time set aside kind of in the end of the kind of program to make sure to ask some questions that you all have for these writers. So just put it in the Q&A. But for now, I'd like to kind of change gears a little bit and think about in general, like the way that you were all using the lyric and the prose in varying levels in these pieces. I wondered how you might, describe your attention to genre and to literary conventions in general. Like, did each of these pieces originally start hybridized? Like, do you feel yourself always writing hybridly? Or did it feel necessary to lean into hybridity as you continued to write the piece? I'd love to hear some of that.
I will jump in. My piece began hybridized. It began without words, right? It began as a photograph, and thinking about a text and image and light. And I think what at the sentence level, when I think about prosody, I think about like clarity and direction and rootedness, right? And so when I turn to, at the sentence level, a sentence that grounds, places, and routes the reader, that is my prose mind. And then when I turn to the image, the metaphor, the turning away, the light, the texture, the depth and weight of language to kind of to open up some windows, maybe, that is where I think my lyrical mind goes. And I think I need both. I think I've become entirely, fantastical and sometimes like deeply dishonest about the emotional thrust of the piece if I do not like gut check the poem with a little bit of grounding. And then sometimes it can become too methodical and too grounded and heavy if there isn't some levity and some language to kind of to lift up the piece. And so, yeah, my poetry deals with similar themes as my essays do, but they don't always come at it at the same way. And I struggle with that. And I'm, and that's where, and that struggle, that's the beautiful struggle for me, because sometimes I'll scrap it all. I'll scrap it and just create a mishmash and like that more than I did either. So I'm not sure that's helpful, but go where you go with it.
Yeah, this the prose as methodical, or prose as grounding almost, feels true for me too. I think I lean on prose when I want a form or a medium that's patient, poetry doesn't feel that patient to me. I think there's something about the concision of poetry, something about the break of the line, that feels like it doesn't necessarily let me meander in some of the directions that I want to sometimes. And so I think I move towards prose. So when I want extra time, I want to be able to wander, and I want the medium to wait for me. There's so much time in prose, and it kind of lets me, at least in this piece, like it let me jump across time, across continents, across oceans, right? Jump from like inside of like what's happening in my body to like another person's body, right? And the gift, I think the gift of prose here is that all of the, it's like, you know, with an essay, I feel like I'm crafting this 3-dimensional or maybe 4-dimensional thing. It's some kind of precious like crystal, like that's the idea or the emotion of an essay. And with prose, I feel like I have time to like turn the thing on its side, to throw it up in the air, you know, and just see where the light catches, to move from fragment to fragment, but to give each fragment a lot of space, and a lot of thought and care. So I think in this particular piece, I feel like I was taking my poet's mind was was the mind that was thinking about music, and that was comfortable with the jumps, comfortable with like the associative leaping inside of the essay. And it's my prose was like my little friend, friend of the poet, who is just waiting and giving me space the whole time. Yeah, that's where I'll leave it.
Yeah, I found it fascinating hearing both of yours insights into how this piece has evolved, and Samantha, I like the idea of prose being a poet's friend, offering space. Yeah, the for me, right from the beginning, this quandary of whether, when I have an impulse to write, whether it should be explored in poetry or in an essay form has always been there from the beginning. And I'm not sure that I have an answer for it. I'm still working my way through it. But I find that a lot of times these impulses stem from either, you know, a question or some form of assaying, like querying, or it can arise from an image. And I think oftentimes that incepting focus is what dictates whether I'm writing a prose heavy piece or something that's more lyrical. In this skin piece that I have in this issue, it began as like a collection of language, but the mode of inquiry was always thought. And so I felt like in the initial stages, it was more like an enumerated essay, but later on as I wrote more into it, I sort of let the language take precedence, and so kind of reveling in the patterns of sound, or the repetitions of images, circling back to certain images that appeared earlier in the piece. All of that kind of took a life of its own too. And I also was thinking about like, what is the occasion for this piece? Like, why am I writing about, why am I obsessing over skin at this point in my life? And I found that that a hybrid form that uses both the tools of the image and the tools of sound, as well as straightforward meditation, that hybridity allowed me to answer that question to myself, which I was asking, like, why am I writing this at this time? So I think in general, in terms of genre, I think I like to think of genre as more of a continuum rather than being like discrete categories. And oftentimes it's a matter of modulating which rhetorical modes we are using in our text, and what formal conventions we are following, and how much of that formal convention we are following. And I find that I'm always interested in reading work that creates a poem in ways that we may not conventionally expect a poem to be. So so yeah, I'm all for hybridity. It's a short answer.
Thank you all so much for giving us your time and everything. I want to apologize. I thought this event was going to go for like way longer, but apparently it's only an hour, very sadly for me. I'm very happy to be hearing everything you're all saying, but if you all don't mind, we do have one question in the Q&A from an audience member, if you don't mind answering that. This is from Natalie. Natalie asks, being a multiracial queer woman, this really had a wonderful impact and gave me a boost of confidence to my writing about my struggles, my life, relationships, and my different selves at different ages. Where do you start with your writing process, whether it's journaling, speaking, etc.? I'd love to hear your thought processes within the starting process of writing.
Okay, you know that moment, maybe you know this moment, when something happens, something small, and you're just like, oh, there's something there. I'm just holding this image, like this thing that I just saw. I know that there's something there. I feel like that's the beginning of the process for me. Like with this essay, I think I was at this Kawali, and I just was sitting in the back and like watching everyone's hands like doing this in front of me, and all I could see was hands, and I was like, oh well, okay, there's an essay here somewhere. I just know, like, there's something so beautiful about this image that I'm seeing. One of my friends, a poet, the poet WLS, she said this thing once about how poets, and maybe all writers, we, in exchange for poems, we pay deep attention to the world. That like our work actually as writers is to notice and to observe and pay attention, or like be devoted to, thank you, Mary Oliver, to the world. And in exchange, like the world gives us these little poem creatures that then like crawl through us onto the field of the page. And I I think maybe that's how the process starts for me, is the noticing, just the being open, and letting what feels heavy and beautiful actually just sit with me and like gather itself until it, maybe trusts me enough to emerge.
Yeah, I really like this, and just piggybacking on the idea of deep noticing and observation. I relate to that. I know I'm a visual thinker, so observation is one of the prime ways that I am sort of generating material for my writing. And just to add to that, I want to say that visual art is also sometimes a great impetus for me in writing, and just sometimes we straightforward ekphrastic writing, but also sometimes an image or an art piece, or even I'm very much interested in clothing and fabrics and textile processes, and just witnessing that or being in the presence of that also spurs me to write, I find. And then it's just a matter of collecting all of these observations and sort of sifting through them and allowing them to exist next to each other and seeing what comes out of it. And I think sometimes we are able to find a spark that generates some particular line of thinking or a narrative that we are reminded of. And then that becomes the through line in the piece of writing that comes out of it. Yeah.
I'm like in my brain now, like my brain wants to take notes. So, I mean, I think it starts, I think for me at least, with like quietness, silence. Like when I give myself time to not be busy, I can journal, I can remember, I use my phone's notes a lot because I often daydream and break off into like fantastical stories in my brain. And so I'm like, oh, write that down. And so, yeah, I think a lot about play and like long walks and like sometimes like being in the middle of a movie and like remembering something and needing to write it down, just like honoring the impulse to just write down random things, but like not pressuring yourself to create something from it right then and there. And also creating a clearing in your life, even if it's like 10 minutes of like playing around with something to be able to make, right? That like the collecting and the wandering is beautiful and generative, but poems are made, like writing is assembled and made. And so like clearing other things off of your plate so that you can have time to play and make and remake. Yeah.
Wow, thank you all so much. I feel actually so inspired to go write. I'm gonna go finish my entire thesis in one night. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful getting to know more about your work, know more about you all as writers. Thank you so much to the audience for being here and staying with us through my extra time. For your question, Natalie, thank you. A recording of the event will be up on our website, HFR's website soon. And everyone who's attended will also be receiving a brief survey to offer feedback on the experience. So thank you in advance for filling that survey out. Please feel free and stay in touch with HFR by signing up for our newsletter, which we'll be throwing in the chat. And yeah, thank you so much everyone for attending. It's been such a wonderful night of imagination and dreaming alongside you all.